Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. As we continue with Part 10, Buddhism, Part 1, Gnosticism and its Sources, from the Gnostics and Their Remains, Ancient and Medieval, by C.W. King. Buddhism. For the sake of comparison with the above-described systems, all based upon the doctrine of successive emanations from one first principle, the means of escaping from the bondage of matter, and the struggles of the souls towards ultimate absorption into its original source, I shall subjoin a very brief sketch of the principal features of the Buddhistic theosophy. Buddhism was founded in the 5th century before our era by Sakyamuni, son of the Raja of Kapila. At the age of 29, he began to study religion, and by force of prayer became the embodiment of the supreme deity when 35 years old. He chose Benares for the center of his mission, whence in the space of 45 years his doctrines were diffused over the fairest districts of the Ganges, from the Delta to Agra and Kanpur. His death is placed by some writers in BC 477. Here also we find a first Buddha in his proper state of eternal repose, the indolentia of Epicurus, corresponding to the Zoroastrian boundless time and the Valentinian baithos. While in this state termed Nevriti, wishing to create the universe, he produced the 5 divine Buddhas, the makers of the elements, who in their turn produced the 5 Bodhisattvas, and by their agency created the material world. The grand aim of this religion is to effect the release of the soul from its connection with matter. All things, according to the Buddhists, exist only in illusion. Consequently, they can only return into non-existence or repose by means of true knowledge. Compare the gnosis we are considering. Illusion is the belief in the reality of the eternal world. The degradation of the soul towards matter is the effect of a succession of acts, and therefore its release is effected by relinquishing the belief in the reality of external objects. The Buddhist confession of faith, regularly set up in the temples engraven on a stone tablet, runs thus: Of all things proceeding from cause their causes hath the Tathagata explained. The great Samana hath likewise explained the causes of the cessation of existence. The essence of the religion, therefore, is perfect knowledge, the object of Virgil's aspiration, Felix qui potuit rerum cognoscere causas. The Buddhists of Nepal, who have preserved the original doctrines of the religion in their greatest purity, teach the following cosmogony. Padnapani, one of the original 5 emanations, created Brahma, Vishnu, Siva, or the principles of creation, preservation, and destruction. Adi-Buddha first created 13 mansions for his own eternal abode and for the dwelling place after death of Buddha's followers. Below these are 18 mansions made by Brahma. Lower yet are 6 made by Vishnu, and lowest of all 3, the work of Siva. These 3 series of abodes receive the souls of the followers of their respective creators. Below all these lie the mansions of the planetary gods, Indra and Chandra, and after these there comes the earth floating upon the face of the waters like a boat. Below these waters are the 7 Patala, or regions of hell, the abode of evil spirits and the damned. This arrangement presents the most striking resemblance to the construction of the Ophite diagramma, to be given further on, which Origen has described from the original and which Monsieur Mater has reconstructed from Origen's description to illustrate his treatise in his plate 10. The promulgation of these Indian speculations from so remote a source, a difficulty at first sight insurmountable, may nevertheless be readily explained. The spirit of this religion was the spirit of proselytism. The Buddhists from the very beginning sent out their missionaries, some of whose narratives, full of interest, are extant and have been translated from the Chinese, with all the zeal of the old propaganda. From the mainland they converted Ceylon, Japan, and the recesses of Tartary, and penetrated into regions where their former presence and tolerated existence are now little dreamed of. 2 Chinese pilgrims, Fa Hian and Hiuen Tsang, visited Benares at the beginning of the 5th and at the middle of the 7th centuries of our era. These keen and sagacious observers have left records of their travels in India of the utmost importance to the historian and antiquary. Their narratives are, for the most part, plain, matter-of-fact productions, free from the haze and uncertainty of Hindu writings. And whenever they have been tested by extraneous evidence, have been found to be to a large extent singularly correct. See Memoirs de Huan Tsang, translated from the Chinese by Stanislas Julian. That Buddhism had been actually planted in the dominions of the Seleucidae and the Ptolemies, Palestine belonging to the former, before the end of the 4th century at least, before our era, is shown by a clause in the edicts of Asoka. This prince was grandson to Chandragupta, the Sandracotus of the Greeks, contemporary and friend of Seleucus I, who, at the head of an army of 60,000 men, had conquered all India within the Ganges. Asoka, at first a licentious tyrant, had embraced the newly preached doctrines of Buddhism, a Brahminical Protestantism, and propagated them by persuasion and by force through the length and breadth of his immense kingdom, with all the usual zeal of a new convert. The edicts referred to are graven on a rock tablet at Gurnur in Gujarat. To quote the words of the Indian archaeologist Prinsep, to whom the discovery is due, Article 27, Indian Antiquities. I am now about to produce evidence that Asoka's acquaintance with geography was not limited to Asia, and that his expansive benevolence towards living creatures extended, at least in intention, to another quarter of the globe, that his religious ambition sought to apostolize Egypt, and that we must look hereafter for traces of the introduction of Buddhism into the fertile valley of the Nile, so productive of metaphysical discussions from the earliest ages. The line which I allude to is the 5th from the bottom. And the Greek king, Yoniraja, besides, by whom the chapter, Egyptian kings, Ptolemaios and Gonkakenos, Antigonus Gonatas, have been induced to allow that both here and in foreign countries, everywhere, the people may follow the doctrine of the religion of Devanipya, wheresoever it reacheth. Asoka's zeal was so ardent that he sent his son and daughter Mahendra and Sogamitra as missionaries to Ceylon, who in a short time effected the conversion of the island to their new religion. The Persian envoy in Aristophanes' Acharnians used the same word, seen here, for the Greek nation. The Essenes, so like to Buddhist monks in many particulars, for which see the minute description of this ascetic rule as given by Josephus, had been established on the shores of the Dead Sea for thousands of ages before Pliny's time. On the west, its shores, so far as they are unhealthy, are shunned by the Esseni, a solitary race and wonderful beyond all others on the globe. Without woman, renouncing all usual enjoyment, without money, associates of the palm trees, from day to day they are recruited by the flocks of newcomers, all those flocking in numerously whom the world drives from itself, all tempest-tossed by the waves of fortune. In this way, incredible to tell, the race wherein no birth ever takes place has endured for thousands of years. So prolific for them is other people's disgust at the world. The great naturalist's thousands of years must be allowed as one of his favorite oratorical tropes, but nevertheless serves for testimony to the belief in the great antiquity of the sect. Perhaps they may have been a continuation of those early ascetic associations known as the schools of the prophets. The influence of Jewish Essenism upon primitive Christianity, as to rules of life at least, is a thing that will not be disputed by any who have read with a wish to learn the truth, not to evade it, the account of it given by Josephus. But over the semi-Christian Gnostics of Syria, such long-established authority must have had a still stronger influence. It is easy to discover how the source of the slavish notions about the merits of asceticism, penances and self-torture, of which Simon Stylites is the most conspicuous illustration, was the same one whence the Indian fakirs drew their practice, for even in their methods they were identical. Simon's celebrated life penance, which gives him his title, undergone upon the summit of a lofty pillar, had been practiced in the same regions many generations before his time. The pseudo-Lucian, in his amusing description of the famous temple of the Syrian goddess at Emesa, Dea Syria, particularly notices the phallus or obelisk 300 feet high, planted in front of the edifice, upon the apex of which the devotee sat without sleep for 21 days and nights, keeping himself awake by constantly ringing a handbell. Ideas like these pervade the Christianity of the Lower Empire, nay, they constitute the very essence of the religion. Neither is it difficult to see upon how many points Manes with his rigid Buddhistic tenets, came into collision with the humane and rational law of Zoroaster, the brightest system of natural religion ever promulgated. And what good causes Varenes, with his spiritual advisors, had for condemning his heresy. In our investigation of this particular subject, it must never be forgotten that so long as philosophy was cultivated in Greece, even from the times of the Saurian sage, inventor of the name, India was often regarded as the ultimate and purest source of the true wisdom, the knowledge of things divine. Even so late as Lucian's time, the middle of the 2nd century, that author concludes his evidently true history of Antipholus and Demetrius by making the latter, a cynic philosopher by profession, resign all his property to his friend and depart for India, there to end his life amongst the Brahmins, Toxaris 34. In the same century, the well-known pilgrimage of Apollonius of Tyana and his deep conference with the Indian philosophers, as recorded by his companion Damis, go to prove the same thing. And although the meager journal of the sage's traveling companion may have been largely supplemented and embellished by the fancy of his editor Philostratus, the main features of the narrative are doubtless authentic. Who composed his very interesting Life of Apollonius at the request of the Empress Julia about a century after the death of the philosopher. The great thaumaturgist's proceedings, as they're detailed, show how the apparent difficulty of such a pilgrimage vanishes upon a better knowledge of the circumstances. Apollonius presents himself, first of all, to the Parthian ring, Bardanes, a Philhellene, as he yet boasts himself upon his coinage, and as warm an admirer of Grecian savants as any of his Achaemenian predecessors, from whom he obtains a firman securing to him protection and entertainment everywhere within the limits of his rule, which extended then probably as far as the Indus. Thenceforward his letters of recommendation from the King of Kings to the various native princes, his allies, secure to the traveller an equally favourable reception. A safe and regular communication between the extreme points of the Persian Empire had been from the beginning the great care of its mighty rulers, the first institutors of highways, posting stages and post horses, passing through what was not, as now, a series of deserts infested by robber tribes, but a populous and well-cultivated country. So favoured, with a passport from the sovereign, the pilgrim would find his journey both expeditious and agreeable. The same facilities were necessarily made use of by the natives of Hindustan. It is curious to observe how the occasional Brahman who found his way into Greece was received as a model philosopher, like that Zarmanis Chagan, who, coming from Bargos, Barosh, finally burnt himself alive upon a pyre at Athens in the reign of Augustus, of which edifying spectacle Nicolaus Damascenus was eyewitness, Strabo 15th. Before him we have Calanus the Gymnosophist, a happy Greek expression for fakir in high repute at Alexander's court, and who similarly chose to leave earth in a chariot of fire. Their example was followed by the peregrinus Proteus, so happily ridiculed by Lucian in his book thus entitled. Proteus, to give his apotheosis as much celebrity as possible, chose for its scene the occasion of the Olympic Games. This last worthy had been a philosopher, then a Christian teacher, and lastly had started a new religion of his own invention. That the sect so celebrated by the ancients under the name of Brahmanes was Buddhistic, not Brahminical, may be inferred from their locality, Bactria, and yet more from a circumstance mentioned by Strabo, Book 25. He speaks of their devoting 30 years to the study of theology, living in a community, a vihar or monastery, sequestered from the world in the midst of forests in the neighborhood of the different cities, and totally abstaining from sexual intercourse and all animal food. On the contrary, the Brahmins hold that to leave children behind them is a most sacred duty, and one upon which their admission into heaven depends. Whether the Buddhists be the true representatives of the primal religion of their country, or only the reformers of the more ancient Brahminical church, it is the natural weapon of all dissenters from an established creed to ridicule and even to pronounce damnable the favorite tenets of their adversaries, which, of course, their theologians claim to be, and treat the Brahmins as corrupters of the true faith. For example, Hyonan Tsang, they reckon in the kingdom of Benares 100 temples of gods inhabited by about 10,000 heretics, who for the most part are worshippers of Shiva. And yet he candidly owns that the Buddhists possess no more than 30 monasteries, numbering only 3,000 members in the same place. Witness Martin Luther with his invectives against vows of virginity and his well-known motto, "Wer nicht lebt Weib, Wein und Gesang, der bleibt ein Narr sein Leben lang." Similarly, we find the Essenes running counter to the ancient prejudices of their nation and spontaneously embracing what the Mosaic law had denounced as the greatest of curses, the leaving no offspring behind to keep up their name in Israel. To exemplify the severe discipline maintained in the Brahmin communities, Strabo mentions that the mere act of blowing the nose or spitting caused the offender to be excluded for that day as incontinent from this society of his fellow recluses. Similarly, Josephus particularizes, amongst other Essenian rules, the obligation of abstaining from all natural evacuations upon the Sabbath day. But even their rigor is surpassed, and in our day too, by a certain sect of Indian yogis who profess to have completely emancipated themselves from all such defiling necessities of nature. This they effect by living entirely upon milk, which after retaining a short time in the stomach they throw up again by swallowing a ball fastened to a string, and maintain the animal expenditure solely through the nutriment imbibed by the system during the continuance of the liquid in the stomach, and which consequently leaves no residuum to descend into the lower bowels. A doctrine this, the finest possible reductio ad absurdum of the notion of meritorious continence, and exhibiting on the ludicrous side the mischief of being too logical in matters of religion. As for the profundity of the philosophical speculations of the Orientals, even at a very late period, the Byzantine Agathias quotes a very remarkable example. Chosroes, better known to us as Nushirwan the Just, besides giving an asylum as to his brethren, to the last Athenian philosophers when expelled from their chairs by the stupid bigot Justinian, caused all Plato's works to be translated into Persian and professed to be himself able to comprehend even the mysteries of the Timaeus. The Greek sophist is naturally indignant at the impudence of the foreigner who could pretend that his own barbarous and rustic language was capable of expressing the divine thoughts of the Athenian sage. For he little suspected that the great king, or at any rate the magi and Sufis about him, were masters of the sources whence Plato may have ultimately drawn his inspiration whilst planning that inscrutable composition. The religious instruction of the Persian princes had from the beginning been carefully attended to, and proficiency therein was a matter of pride. Thus, Cyrus the Younger puts forward his superior knowledge of theology in his manifesto upon claiming the kingdom as a just cause why he should be preferred to his elder brother. Leaving out of the question the now received theory as to the immigration of the Indo-Germanic race into the farthest recesses of Europe, modern history furnishes the example of extensive migration effected under infinitely greater difficulties by the hordes of low-caste Hindus who, flying from the invasion of Tamerlane, spread themselves all over Europe as gypsies, still retaining their native language and habits, and to the present day claiming Sind or Cinder for their national name. The facts adduced in the foregoing sketch will suffice to indicate the manner in which the germs of the various Gnostic doctrines were imported from the East, how they were engrafted upon previously existing notions, and how vigorously they flourished when transplanted into the kindly soil of Alexandria and Ephesus. To complete the general view of the subject, before proceeding to consider the tangible monuments left us by these ideas, it will be necessary to give some account of the forms in which they attain to their fullest development. For this purpose, I shall select the three principal systems, represented by historians as the parents of all the rest, those of Simon Magus, Basilides, and the Ophites, the most satisfactory manner of doing which will be to transcribe the exact words of the well-informed and impartial Hippolytus. A circular green jasper of the size of the drawing, preserved from time immemorial in Maastricht Cathedral, where it passes for the seal of St. Servatius, although in reality many centuries posterior to his date, being a late medieval work. The obverse represents the bust of some saint, the reverse the Gnostic gorgon, around both rims a most barbarous attempt at a common Byzantine spell, that is of a few of the first words only. The spell in full may be translated thus: Death, Moira, black, blackening, as a serpent dost thou writhe, as a lion dost thou roar, but as a lamb shalt thou lie down. Page 57. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment, and if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.